thought no one noticed the cameras. I thought they were just for insurance against porch pirates and the occasional raccoon. But when Karen Whitaker raised her hand to me that night for the last time, she didn't know I had hidden the feed. She didn't know my silent obedience was just a line of code waiting to execute. So when her voice finally cracked on that final desperate call asking what I had done, my answer was simple. I just said, I didn't change the code. My name is Lauren Hayes and I am 32 years old. I live in a quiet two-story house nestled in the perpetual perfection of Pineview Estates, a suburban paradise outside Seattle where manicured lawns and polite neighborhood waves conceal the rot that can fester behind HOA covenants. This house belonged to my late father, but it is ruled by Karen Whitaker, the self-appointed queen of the community. To the world, Karen is a pillar at block parties. She's the one manning the welcome table, laughing the loudest, her highlighted bob and pearl earrings exuding that perfect suburban mom charm. She remembers everyone's anniversary, asks about their kids' soccer games, and offers to help a neighbor repaint their mailbox the approved beige. She is the picture of the affable, hard-working HOA president. But that picture fades the moment the clipboard comes out. Behind the smiles, the laughter dies in her throat. The eyes that seemed so warm under the July sun become small and calculating. My neighbors live in a state of carefully curated denial. Don't provoke her, Lauren. They'd whisper while trimming their hedges to the exact 3-inch height mandated by Section 4.2. She has a temper, but she keeps property values up. She helps with the newsletter. That was their mantra. The phrase that excused the tense silences at meetings, the sudden fines over a misplaced garden gnome. The way she looked at me as if my very existence, a single woman working from home with visible solar panels, was an affront to curb appeal. Property values were rising, so the bruises on everyone's dignity didn't count. That night, the storm that had been brewing for months finally broke. The source of her fury was a piece of software I had written years ago, back when I was a systems engineer before the HOA decided my tech hobbies were inappropriate. It was a simple but elegant security script for the 4 cameras I installed after the first wave of anonymous complaints about my non-compliant front porch light. My personal project encrypted the feed and created a secure timestamp log that was nearly impossible to tamper with. To Karen, it was a black box she couldn't control, a piece of my old life, my independence that I had stubbornly mounted on my own property. She had been sipping her signature community lemonade at the last board meeting, which was really just white wine in a tumbler, and the smell of entitlement hung heavy in the air. She cornered me on my driveway just after sunset, her petite frame somehow blocking the light from the street lamp. I told you to get rid of that damn system, Lauren, she said, her voice a low growl wrapped in pastel politeness. I want the default software, the one the rest of us can understand. I want those cameras gone by midnight. It's for the good of the neighborhood. I kept my own voice level, a trick I'd learned from years of de-escalating her mood swings disguised as board decisions. It's a better system. It's more secure. And it's on my private property. I don't give a damn if it's more secure, she spat, taking a step closer. I could feel the heat radiating from her fake tan skin. This is my community. I want to be able to review the footage without needing a goddamn IT degree. You think you're so smart with your little programs and your fancy degree. You're not. You're just a resident here. The neighbor's words echoed in my head. Don't provoke her. But I had been shrinking for years, making myself smaller and quieter to keep the peace. I was done shrinking. I looked past her shoulder, my gaze fixed on the glowing red dot of the nearest camera, and I said the only thing that mattered. Don't change the code. It was quiet, not a shout, but it landed in the tense air between us with the force of a gavel. For a moment, everything stopped. The hum of sprinklers, the muffled sound of a distant lawnmower, the frantic beating of my own heart. I saw the shift in her eyes, the manufactured charm, the simmering rage. It all drained away, replaced by something flat and final. The mask was off. Her hand was a blur. It wasn't a slap. It was a strike. Heavy and solid like the clipboard she always carried. The impact sent a shock wave through my cheek and the perfectly edged lawn rushed up to meet me. I heard a gasp, a raw, terrified sound that I belatedly realized came from Mrs. Patel across the street, who had been pretending to water her roses. It was followed by the sharp clatter of my phone scattering across the concrete. I crumpled, my shoulder hitting the ground first, my head narrowly missing the edge of the HOA-approved flowerbed. The world tilted, a kaleidoscope of blurred porch lights and deep swimming shadows. The pain was a blooming flower of fire on my face, but my mind was strangely crystal clear. Through the ringing in my ears, one thought cut through the chaos, precise and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. The camera is still running. She stood over me, her chest heaving, her face a mask of contempt wrapped in concern for any onlookers. She thought she had won. She thought this was the end of the argument, the final assertion of her control. She didn't know it was the beginning. She didn't know that the code she was so obsessed with was a decoy. She thought I hadn't changed it out of defiance. The truth was, I had changed it, just not in the way she imagined. The script she saw, the one she wanted deleted, was a front. The real code was buried deeper, woven into the firmware. It was a silent watchdog. It listened for keywords, for specific inflections of distress, for unauthorized access attempts, her shouted demands, my name spoken with that particular edge of entitlement, her attempt just an hour earlier to review the footage through the neighborhood portal. And it had all been logged. My quiet final statement tonight was the trigger phrase. The system wasn't just recording anymore. It was executing a new command. As I lay on the driveway tasting blood, I pictured it happening. The last 6 minutes of high-definition video and audio weren't just being saved to the local drive she occasionally demanded access to. They were being packetized, encrypted again with a key she couldn't even dream of cracking, and rerouted. The data flowed out of our quiet suburban house. A silent digital scream traveling through a series of anonymous proxies before landing on a secure private server located thousands of miles away. It was all being saved into a cloud account under a name she'd never heard. A ghost I had created years ago for moments exactly like this. The throbbing in my cheek was a dull, rhythmic echo of the impact. But it was the cold of the concrete seeping through my jeans that anchored me to the present. From this vantage point, the world was a collection of angles and shadows, the underside of my own welcome mat, the perfectly aligned blades of grass that Karen herself had fined me $250 for last month because one rogue dandelion dared to exist. This house, the one I grew up visiting on weekends, had become a foreign country under HOA occupation. It had started the day my father's will left it to me outright, leaving a silence that the community couldn't bear. The silence was their enemy, and Karen Whitaker was its cure. She had swooped in with a speed that felt less like civic duty and more like a desperate grab for control. Karen was a real estate agent turned board president, a woman who dealt in covenants and fines, and she projected an aura of what the neighbors called dependable leadership. She was a woman who could fix things, and the neighborhood, rattled by one too many eyesore complaints, saw her as the ultimate project. She filled the monthly meetings with her booming voice, her color-coded agendas, her opinions on everything from the proper shade of beige shutters to the exact timing of holiday lights. October 15th to January 5th only, no exceptions. She filled the void left by my quiet independence. But the substance she used was poison. Her disdain for my life, my mind, was immediate and absolute. I remember one meeting not long after I moved in permanently. I was trying to explain the elegance of a new encryption algorithm I was developing for personal security apps. I was passionate, my hands sketching the flow of data in the air. She watched me from the head of the folding table, a placid, dismissive smile on her face. When I finished, she chuckled. "That's nice, honey," she said, as if I had just shown her a Pinterest board of craft projects. "But women shouldn't be messing with computers and all that code. That's a man's world. It'll just scramble your brain, or worse, make you question the rules that keep us all safe." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a decree. The comment was the first fine in a wall she began building around me. My career was a threat, not because of the work itself, but because it was mine. It gave me a world outside her control, a language she didn't speak. The harassment started subtly. She'd make comments about my unsightly solar panels at meetings. Then she focused on my colleagues. "I don't like you hosting those Zoom calls with outsiders," she'd say in the group chat. "Especially not the tech types." It escalated until one afternoon she waited for me at the community mailbox, her face dark with fury, and told me that if I didn't remove the cameras by the next board vote, she'd pay a visit to every neighbor and explain how unstable I had been since my father passed. The threat was clear. She would destroy my reputation to get her way. I complied a week later, or at least I pretended to, citing technical difficulties. The look of quiet triumph on her face when I told her the system was downgraded was something I will never forget. That was when I truly lost the neighborhood. I tried to talk to Mrs. Patel to explain the suffocating pressure, the veiled threats. She wrung her hands, her eyes darting away from mine. "Oh, Lauren, you're being too sensitive," she'd said, smoothing her HOA-approved apron. "Karen just worries about property values. She wants what's best for us, for this community." She chose Karen's version of reality over mine. She chose the woman who kept the newsletter glossy over the daughter figure who was being systematically erased. Slowly, imperceptibly, the neighbors became her allies, and I became the difficult, ungrateful problem in their otherwise perfect subdivision. Karen's control soon became absolute. She started with the fines, $100 for grass over 3 inches, $200 for unapproved holiday decor, $500 for visual pollution, when my recycling bin lingered an extra day. Soon, my bank account was something she indirectly controlled through escalating penalties, handing out warnings like allowance. She never put her name on my deed. It was still mine, a fact she used as a tool of supposed generosity. But she controlled the escrow account from which the HOA dues were paid. The neighborhood was our prison, and she was the warden, constantly reminding us of her benevolence in keeping the standards high. It was in this suffocating atmosphere that I began my own project. My return to code was a secret rebellion conducted late at night in the quiet of my home office. I told the board I was setting up a new security system after the break-ins 2 streets over. "It's just smart," I'd explained, using their own middle-class anxieties as my cover. Karen, despite her hatred of my skills, loved the idea of cameras. It appealed to her sense of ownership and control. She even helped approve the placement, pointing out the best angles on my garage and side yard, never once suspecting that the system's primary function wasn't to watch for intruders from the outside, but to document the tyrant within. I was building my case file, one silent, encrypted recording at a time. There were other times she had corrected me, as she liked to call it. A public shaming at the annual barbecue for my rebellious front door wreath. A hand gripping my arm so tightly it left bruises because I'd spoken out of turn at the budget meeting. During each of these moments, she would look for fear in my eyes. She wanted to see me break, but I would just go still, my breathing even, and my gaze would drift upward to the corner of the garage where a small black dome was mounted. I'd focus on the tiny pinprick of faint red light, barely visible in the gloom. It was my witness. It was my partner. She saw my stillness as submission, my silence as defeat. She had no idea that I was simply waiting, gathering data, letting her build the case against herself. I was waiting for the right moment, the perfect set of variables before I ran my final script. My old boss at the cybersecurity firm once told me that the most dangerous vulnerability in any system is the human element, the arrogance of the user who thinks they are in control. Karen was that user, and I had learned something essential from my former career. A principle that I now applied to my life. Revenge isn't rage. Rage is messy. A denial of service attack that crashes the whole system. Revenge is precision. It's a perfectly written piece of code hidden in plain sight, waiting for one specific condition to be met before it executes its function flawlessly. And Karen had just met the condition. She left me on the driveway, a storm of self-righteous fury carrying her back to her golf cart with the HOA president sticker. I didn't wait. The pain in my cheek was a grounding presence, a reminder of the stakes. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest, and walked on unsteady feet into my garage, locking the side door behind me. There were no tears. Tears were a luxury, an indulgence in an emotion I couldn't afford. My first and only move was toward the dull black rectangle of my laptop. The machine booted with a soft chime, its screen a pool of light in the darkened room. My fingers, steady and sure, moved across the keyboard. This was my world, the one place Karen couldn't find or censor. Accessing the server wasn't as simple as typing a password. My real work was hidden behind layers of digital misdirection. I first launched a custom VPN, routing my connection through a chain of servers in Zurich, then Singapore, then Estonia. To any outside observer, my digital footprint was a ghost, a flicker that vanished before it could be traced. Only then did I open a secure terminal and SSH into the server, a virtual machine hosted on a rig in a country that viewed data privacy laws as a quaint suggestion. Authentication required a 256-bit encryption key stored on a simple unlabeled USB drive I wore on a chain around my neck, followed by a password that was a randomized string of 64 characters I had long ago committed to memory. The system recognized me. A simple command line interface appeared. No graphics, no friendly icons, just pure function. I navigated to the directory. There it was, a single new file, its name a sterile string of numbers representing the year, month, day, hour, minute, and second the recording had been triggered. I downloaded it, the progress bar filling with agonizing slowness, a digital transfer of my own humiliation. Then I opened the file. The video was brutally clear, shot in 4K from the wide-angle lens I had so carefully positioned. The audio was crisp, capturing the low growl in her voice, my own dangerously quiet defiance, the sickening thud of her hand against my skin, and the sharp clatter of my phone on the concrete. The clip was 6 minutes and 12 seconds long. It was more than enough to burn her entire empire to the ground. My first impulse, the hot, raw, human part of me wanted to upload it everywhere, to send it to every local news station, post it on every neighborhood Facebook group and watch the digital firestorm consume her. But that was rage, not precision. Rage leaves witnesses and creates martyrs. I had a better plan, one that would not just punish her, but make her the instrument of her own destruction. I knew from listening to her boastful board meeting rants that she was on the short list for Community Leader of the Year from the National HOA Association. She was set to become the regional face for a $40 million neighborhood beautification grant. It was the pinnacle of her petty career. I also knew that the parent organization, a national nonprofit with a carefully polished public image, had strict morality clauses in their contracts, personal conduct, background checks, public perception. All of it mattered. Her reputation was her most valuable asset, and I was about to short it into oblivion. I didn't want to just get her removed from the board. I wanted her name to become so toxic that no HOA in America would touch her again. So I set my plan in motion. I created a copy of the video file. On this version, I overlaid a subtle but undeniable watermark in the bottom right corner, the official logo of the National HOA Association, followed by the date and time of the incident. It was designed to look like an internal security leak, something from their own files, lending it a veneer of irrefutable authenticity. Next, I created a new identity, a Proton email account routed through the Tor network to make it untraceable. I composed a message, this tone clipped and professional. It was addressed not to a generic complaints inbox, but directly to the National Director of Ethics, a woman whose name I had found after an hour of deep diving through public filings and LinkedIn. The subject line was stark: check your regional presidents before trusting your grants. The body contained a single sentence. The attached file is a recording from the home of Karen Whitaker, your prospective community leader of the year. I suggest you review it before finalizing any awards. Below it was a secure encrypted one-time use link to the watermarked video. I hit send. The first domino had been pushed, but a digital trace wasn't enough. I needed a physical component, a trap laid in the real world. I went back outside. The neighborhood was silent now, curtains twitching behind every window. I slipped into my garage, the air thick with the smell of fresh-cut grass and Karen's lingering perfume. This was her territory, the place where she had once inspected my setup. I found her spare key to the community storage shed taped under a workbench, a little secret I had noticed months ago. My hands were shaking slightly now, not from fear, but from a cold, thrilling surge of adrenaline. I took a small folded piece of paper from my pocket. It was a high-quality print of a single frame from the video. The moment just before she struck, her face a grotesque mask of rage. Below the image, I had printed a small QR code. If scanned, it linked directly to the original unwatermarked video file still sitting on my anonymous server. I slipped the paper beneath a stack of HOA-approved welcome signs in the shed, burying it under the clutter of her world. A little secret waiting for her. The final piece of the puzzle was the most elegant. It was the dead man's switch I had coded into the security system itself. My quiet defiance and her subsequent assault had activated a new protocol. The system was now a loaded gun. The moment anyone tried to access the administrator controls, to delete files, to roll back the software, to, in her words, change the code, a secondary script would automatically execute. This script would bundle the original pristine video file into an email and send it not just to one person, but to a curated list I had built over months, 24 local news reporters, investigative journalists, every single homeowner in Pineview Estates, and popular suburban living bloggers. I knew she would do it. It was not a possibility. It was a certainty. Her arrogance, her desperate need for control would compel her to try and erase the evidence she now suspected might exist. She would be unable to stop herself from trying to smash the machine that had recorded her sin, and in doing so, she would pull the trigger herself. She was the most predictable variable in the entire equation. Back in my kitchen, I logged out of the anonymous account, cleared my cache, and shut down the laptop. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for the animal to walk into it. The next morning, the sun streamed through the kitchen window with a kind of cheerful indifference. It illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air and the faint, almost invisible crack in the HOA-approved beige paint by the doorway. I sat at the table, nursing a cup of black coffee, the ceramic warm against my palms. The left side of my face was a tender, swollen landscape of purple and yellow, a blooming, ugly flower. I hadn't bothered with makeup. I wanted it to be seen. I wanted it to be a silent accusation in the bright morning light. My phone buzzed with the first text from Mrs. Patel. Lauren dear, we saw what happened. You fell, right? Karen was just concerned. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a script the entire block had written and rehearsed in the dark hours of the night. It was an invitation to join them in their fiction. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch until it was taut and humming. I typed back, "If that's what you need to believe." Her reply came instantly, "Don't you dare ruin this community. Do you have any idea what Karen does for us? She keeps property values up." A laugh escaped my lips. It was a harsh, ugly sound, utterly devoid of humor. It felt like coughing up a piece of glass that had been lodged in my throat for years. Community. I repeated the word as if it were a foreign term I was tasting for the first time. "You call this a community? This isn't a community. It's a long-term rental agreement. She finds your peace of mind and she finds my freedom. She signs the violation notices and in return, you look the other way and I keep my mouth shut. That's the deal. But the deal is over." She didn't reply. The last frayed thread that had connected me to the neighborhood had just been severed. That evening, Karen came rolling up in her golf cart bearing a bouquet of HOA-approved white roses, the cheap kind from the community center gift shop, wrapped in crackling cellophane. She presented them to the entire block via group text with a flourish, posting a photo of herself smiling, as if the last 24 hours had been nothing more than a bad dream. She was performing, playing the role of the magnanimous president, the benevolent leader forgiving a minor misunderstanding. She reset the board over the next emergency Zoom meeting. She was jovial, telling a long, rambling story about a foolish resident who didn't understand rules. The neighbors laughed at all the right places, their eyes shining with a desperate, willed adoration. I watched in silence, a ghost at the feast. After the call ended, she cornered me again via private message. "We're good now, right?" she asked, her voice soft, reasonable in the text. It wasn't a question. It was a command. Command to agree, to forget, to fall back in line. It was the same tone she'd used before finding someone for an unapproved mailbox. It was the sound of a lid being placed back on a boiling pot. I didn't answer. I just looked at the screen. I held her digital gaze, letting her see the cold, flat emptiness in my reply, a single emoji of a camera. The smile faltered in her next message. That cold, hard anger flashed before she could conceal it. She turned away with a grunt of frustration I could almost hear. I knew I had my answer. There was no going back. The last vestige of my doubt, the faint, lingering hope that something could be salvaged, died in that moment. I went to my office. The time for defense was over. It was time to go on the attack. I sat at my desk, my laptop humming quietly. I opened a new email. In the recipient field, I typed Karen Whitaker's personal email address, the one she used for everything. I didn't bother with a subject line. I simply attached one file, the original pristine 6-minute video of her assault on me. Then, in the body of the email, I typed 3 words, the same 3 words I had spoken to her before she had struck me. The words that had started it all. Don't change the code. I hit send. Then I opened the monitoring console for my security system's back end. It was a simple text-based log feed, a scrolling cascade of system status updates. Everything was green. System nominal. I sat back and waited. I didn't have to wait long. 12 minutes later, the first red line of text appeared. Alert. Unauthorized access attempt. Admin login failure. My heart gave a single hard thump against my ribs. She was in her home office just down the street. I could almost picture her face illuminated by the glow of her monitor, her manicured fingers stabbing at the keyboard, her confidence turning to frantic, sweating panic. Another line appeared. Alert. Unauthorized access attempt. Root failure. She was trying a different way trying to bypass the user interface and get into the system's core. She was getting desperate. A third line scrolled by. Alert. Access denied. IP blacklisted. She had failed 3 times. She was locked out. But I knew her. She wouldn't stop. She would be convinced there was a way. A master password. A physical switch. She would see it as a challenge to her authority. An inanimate object defying her will. I leaned closer to the screen. My breath held tight in my chest. And then it happened. The screen flashed. The scrolling log vanished, replaced by a single large pulsating red banner. The letters were stark and final. Alert. Forced entry protocol triggered. Failsafe sequence initiated. Below it, another line appeared. A confirmation that glowed with a terrible finality. Payload sent. Recipient list. Full neighborhood plus media. A slow smile spread across my face. She had done it. Her own panic. Her own arrogance. Her own uncontrollable need to dominate and erase had been the final key. She had walked into the trap, slammed the door behind her, and set the whole thing on fire. She had just personally delivered the evidence of her own crime to every journalist and every homeowner who mattered in Pineview Estates. The chain reaction was complete. She didn't just change the code. She executed it. The neighborhood settled into a heavy, suffocating silence after the emails went out. It was the kind of quiet that feels loud, an absence of noise that presses in on you. I sat in the dark of my office, my laptop the only source of light, the monitoring log still open on the screen. The glowing red banner felt like a declaration of victory. The script had run. The payload was away. Now the world would do the rest. At exactly 10 p.m., I turned on the small television in my living room. Keeping the volume low, I navigated to the local news channel, the one with the folksy, overly tanned anchors who reported on HOA disputes and traffic accidents with the same level of grave importance. They were in the middle of a segment on a proposed zoning change when the male anchor held up a hand, a look of practiced seriousness on his face. "We are interrupting this program with a breaking story," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "Our station has just received a disturbing video that appears to show the president of Pineview Estates HOA, Karen Whitaker, in a violent altercation with a resident." My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic, wild bird in a cage. They put her official headshot on the screen, the same professionally lit photo from the HOA website. She was smiling, her eyes crinkling, the very picture of a trustworthy leader. Then they cut to the video. It was pixelated, clearly marked as viewer discretion advised. They didn't show the full 6 minutes. They didn't even show the impact. All they showed was a 10-second clip. It was enough. It showed her face contorted with a rage so pure it was almost bestial. It showed her hand raised, a blur of motion. It showed me on the ground. My face turned away. The audio was slightly distorted, but her voice was clear, laced with venom. They cut the clip just before the sound of the blow. The anchor reappeared, his face a mask of solemn concern. Again, that was Karen Whitaker, president of Pineview Estates HOA, who is slated to receive the National Community Leader of the Year award. "We have reached out to Ms. Whitaker and to the National HOA Association for comment. We will bring you more details as the story develops." The story didn't take long to develop. The moment the segment ended, my phone, which I had placed face down on my desk, began to vibrate. It skittered across the wood like a cornered insect. I picked it up. The screen glowed with a single word, "Karen." I watched the call ring, the vibrations buzzing against my palm until it went to voicemail. A second later, started again. I silenced it, placing the phone back on the desk. It was immediately followed by another call. This time, the screen flashed with a name in all capital letters, a setting she had programmed herself, Karen President. The vibration was angry, insistent. I let it ring, imagining her on the other end, her face florid, her mind reeling, trying to understand how her perfectly controlled world had just been so publicly breached. She called 3 more times, back to back. I ignored them all. Then a new call, an unknown number with a local area code. I knew instantly it wasn't a friend. It was the national HOA office. A lawyer, a crisis PR manager, someone from ethics. It was the sound of an organization scrambling to contain a liability. I let that one go to voicemail too. My silence was a weapon, and for the first time in years, it was mine to wield. A new text message notification pinged. It was from Karen. The message was a jumble of furious, panicked characters riddled with typos. "What did you do, you psycho? What did you do?" I took a moment, my fingers hovering over the screen. I corrected her lack of punctuation in my mind. Then I typed my reply, each letter a small, cold, deliberate tap. "I told you. Don't change the code." I sent the message and then put the phone in airplane mode. The outside world could wait. I turned my attention back to my laptop. Logging back into the secure server, I pulled up the access logs for the video file. The number was climbing at an exponential rate. 10 views, 100, 1,000. By the time I had refreshed the page, it had surpassed 2,000. It had gone viral in our small corner of the internet. A piece of digital dynamite passed from one curious hand to another. News alerts began to pop up on the side of my screen. Pineview HOA president caught on camera assaulting resident. National HOA Association suspends local leader amid scandal. Then came the one I was waiting for. It was a press release posted on a major wire service. National HOA Association issues statement regarding Karen Whitaker. I clicked the link. The text was cold, corporate, and utterly ruthless. "We are aware of the disturbing video circulating online involving one of our regional presidents, Karen Whitaker. The conduct depicted in the video is reprehensible and does not reflect the values of our organization. Ms. Whitaker has been suspended indefinitely, pending a full internal investigation. We are cooperating fully with local authorities. Suspended indefinitely. Cooperating with authorities." Those were the key phrases. They were cutting her loose. Her community leader award, her regional grant, her carefully constructed reputation, all of it had been vaporized in the space of an hour. That was when I heard it. A faint, distant siren, a mournful wail that grew steadily louder, cutting through the quiet suburban night. I stood up and walked to my window, pushing aside the curtains. Down the street, a pair of headlights swept across the neat, dark houses, followed by the rhythmic, strobing pulse of red and blue lights. A police cruiser. It slowed as it approached Karen's house, its searchlight playing over the perfectly manicured lawn, the cheerful-looking welcome sign, the dark windows. It came to a stop directly in front of her driveway. The flashing lights washed my room in a silent, frantic disco. I could hear muffled shouts from down the block. Karen's voice thick with panicked rage. The doorbell rang, a sharp, piercing chime, followed by a heavy, authoritative knock. The officers opened the door. I didn't move from the window. I watched as 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. A few minutes later, they emerged and between them was Karen. Her hands were cuffed behind her back, her crisp polo shirt rumpled, her face a pale slack mask of disbelief. They walked her down the driveway, right past her golf cart with the president sticker. They stopped her right at the end of the drive, directly under the streetlight, and I could see it. Even in the chaotic flashing of the lights, the small black dome of the camera on my house, its tiny red light still glowing faintly. It was the witness, the silent, impartial observer that had started it all, now watching the final scene play out. The instrument of her downfall was documenting her final humiliation. The neighbors stumbled out onto their porches behind them. They were wrapped in robes, their hair a mess, their faces streaked with the realization that they had chosen the wrong side. They weren't looking at me. They were just staring at Karen, at the woman they had chosen, The woman who was supposed to be their dependable leader, as she was gently but firmly pushed into the back of the police car. They made small wounded sounds like animals, and then just stood there, their bodies shaking with the shock of it all. A lonely, desolate group illuminated by the cold, unforgiving flashes of red and blue. The community was broken. The lawns were still perfect, but the foundation had just been bulldozed into dust. The courtroom was an exercise in beige mediocrity, a place designed to strip all drama from human misery. The walls were a dull ecru. The fluorescent lights hummed with a monotonous buzz, and the air smelled faintly of stale coffee and old paper. It was a sterile environment for such a messy, brutal affair. The hearing took place 3 weeks after her arrest, a lifetime compressed into a handful of days. I sat beside the prosecutor, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davies, who had looked at me with a kind of weary understanding from our very first meeting. Across the room, Karen sat next to her lawyer. She was wearing an ill-fitting suit, a size too tight in the shoulders, a pathetic attempt to project the image of the successful leader she no longer was. Her face was puffy. Her skin had a grayish pallor, but her eyes, whenever they chanced to glance at me, were still burning with that same arrogant, self-righteous fury. She believed, even now, that she was the victim. In the back row of the gallery, the neighbors sat scattered, a small, hunched group who seemed to shrink every time the courtroom doors opened. They looked 10 years older, ghosts haunted by the choices they had made, and they never, not once, met my gaze. The centerpiece of the prosecution's case was, of course, the video. Ms. Davies had it played on a large screen set up for the jury. The 6 minutes and 12 seconds of footage unspooled in the silent, tense courtroom. No one moved. The jury was a tableau of rapt, horrified faces. I watched them, not the screen. I saw a woman flinch. I saw a man shake his head slowly, his jaw tight. I didn't need to see the video again. I had every frame, every sound burned into my memory. When the screen went black, the silence it left behind was heavier and more damning than any testimony. Karen's lawyer, a man with slicked back hair and a smile that never reached his eyes, rose to his feet for the cross-examination. His strategy was exactly what I had anticipated. He wasn't going to argue the context. He was going to attack the reality itself. Ms. Hayes, he began, his voice dripping with condescension. You have a background in systems engineering, correct? Cybersecurity, I believe. Yes, I answered, my own voice clear and steady. So you're an expert in digital media. You know how to manipulate code, how to edit video, how to create fictions. I know how to build secure systems, I corrected him. He waved a dismissive hand. The defense contends that this video, this supposed evidence, is nothing more than a sophisticated fabrication, a deepfake, an elaborate digital lie created by a vindictive woman with a grudge and the technical skills to pull it off. What do you say to that? This was the moment. Ms. Davies had prepped me, but I didn't need it. This was my language, my territory. I turned my body slightly to address the jury directly. You can't deepfake a checksum hash, I said, my voice calm and clinical as if I were delivering a lecture. Every digital file has a unique fingerprint, a string of characters called a hash which is generated from the data within the file itself. The system I wrote generated a unique SHA-256 hash for that video file the instant the recording stopped. That hash, along with a secure immutable timestamp from a network time protocol server, was embedded into the file's metadata and logged on a separate write-once ledger on my server. I leaned forward slightly. Any alteration to that video, even changing a single pixel from black to a slightly lighter shade of black, would result in a completely different hash. The video file presented as evidence has been verified. This hash is a perfect match for the one generated and logged at 7:47 p.m. on the night of the incident. It is cryptographically impossible for it to have been altered in any way. It is authentic. I saw the jury's eyes glaze over at the technical jargon, but they understood the conclusion. The defense lawyer's smug expression faltered. He looked to the judge, who had been listening with an unnerving stillness. The judge, an older man with a reputation for being thorough, simply nodded once. "The court accepts the video's authenticity," he stated, his voice flat. It was a death blow to Karen's entire defense. The color drained from her face. Her lawyer, visibly flustered, tried a different tack. He decided to attack my character, my motives. "Ms. Hayes," he said, his voice now a low, insinuating growl. "Let's assume for a moment that this was real. You claim this wasn't the first time. You claim there was a pattern of behavior. Yet there are no prior police reports, no calls to 911. If what you claim is true, why did you never go to the authorities? Why didn't you report this sooner? Why wait and build this elaborate technological trap?" The question hung in the air, thick and heavy. This, I knew, was the question that mattered most. Not just for the jury, but for me. I paused. I let the silence stretch, drawing every eye in the room to me. I looked at the lawyer. I looked at the 12 faces of the jury, a mix of men and women, all staring at me, waiting. I let my gaze drift to the neighbors, who were now visibly trembling, their hands clutching their purses in their laps. Finally, I looked at the judge. My voice, when I spoke, was not loud. It was quiet, but it filled the entire room, a resonant frequency of pain and truth that had been suppressed for years. "Because nobody believes a resident," I said, "until she has a video." A profound, absolute stillness fell over the courtroom. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. The lawyer had no follow-up question. The jury members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their gazes dropping to the notebooks in front of them. Ms. Davies gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. In that moment, the trial ceased to be about one woman hitting another. It became about every resident who had ever been told she was exaggerating, that she was being too sensitive, that she must have provoked the board, that her memory was faulty, that her word was not enough. The silence was my vindication. The verdict was a formality after that, guilty on all counts. At the sentencing, the judge was stern. He spoke of the breach of trust, the sanctity of the neighborhood, and the chilling, calculated nature of the violence captured on the recording. 6 months and permanent removal from any HOA board, he said, the words landing like a hammer blow. Karen stood, her face a mask of shocked, sputtering rage. She tried to turn to shout something at me, but 2 bailiffs were already on her, gripping her arms and leading her away. I just watched her go, her silhouette shrinking as she was escorted through a side door. She was gone. Ms. Davies put a gentle hand on my arm. "Are you okay?" she asked. I looked at her, then back at the empty space where Karen had stood. I didn't shed a tear. I had already cried them all in silence in the dark over the course of years. Today, there were none left. Today was not for sorrow. It was for the cold, quiet satisfaction of a debt finally being paid in full. She was gone before the first week was out. Her departure was not a dramatic, tear-filled scene, but a quiet, methodical eraser. She packed 2 suitcases, leaving behind a neighborhood full of memories she could no longer bear to look at. She didn't have a yard sale. She didn't call a moving company. She simply packed her golf cart one gray Washington morning and drove south toward the relentless sunshine of California, a place she always talked about as if it were a synonym for forgetting. She left a note on the community bulletin board, a single folded piece of paper held down by a thumbtack. "The board is yours. The lawyer has the paperwork. Be happy, everyone. It wasn't a plea or a wish. It was an abdication. She was leaving me the crime scene, the entire tainted inheritance. In the days that followed, the neighborhood was a mausoleum of silence. The quiet was different now. It wasn't the tense, watchful silence of before, a quiet that waited for the next fine. This was a hollow, echoing silence, filled with the ghosts of things unsaid, of choices made and unmade. I walked through the streets, and it was as if I was seeing them for the first time. The dent in the community sign where she had thrown her clipboard in a fit of pique. The faint water stain on the welcome banner from a leak she had always promised to fix but never did. The neighborhood was a museum of her neglect and her rage. I started my work in the community storage shed. The air was still thick with her presence. The smells of fresh paint and stale coffee. Her clipboards were still hung on the pegboard, arranged with a meticulous, almost fanatical precision that she never applied to her own emotions. On the concrete floor near the workbench was a dark rust-colored stain. It wasn't blood, but it might as well have been. It was from a can of approved beige paint she had knocked over months ago while shouting at a resident about a credit card bill for the newsletter. She had never bothered to clean it up properly. It had soaked into the porous concrete, permanent ugly scar. I looked at its irregular map-like shape. I thought about getting a wire brush and some industrial cleaner, about scrubbing it until my knuckles were raw, until it was gone. But I didn't. I left it there. It was part of the neighborhood's history now. It was a piece of evidence, and I was done hiding the evidence. My primary task was to decommission the system. The cameras, my silent, loyal sentinels, were no longer needed. I went through the streets with a screwdriver and a pair of wire cutters, methodically dismantling my own creation. I started at my own garage, taking down the camera that watched the side yard. I coiled the wires, unscrewed the mount from the eaves, and held the cool plastic dome in my hand for a moment before placing it in a cardboard box. I did the same for the ones on my house and even offered to help neighbors remove theirs if they wanted. Each one I removed felt like a lock I was unfastening, a bar I was taking off a window. I was letting the light back in. But I left one. The camera on my garage. The first one I had ever installed. The one that had served as the prototype for the entire system. It remained in its place in the corner, its wide-angle lens still surveying the whole space. It was no longer recording. I had wiped the local drives and shut down the remote server. Its red light was gone. It was just an object now, a piece of plastic and glass. But to me, it was a memorial, a silent, unblinking monument to the moment I had decided to fight back. The brain of the operation, the custom-built server tower I had assembled in my closet, was the last piece. I unplugged the mess of cables, Ethernet, power, video feeds, and carried the heavy black box into the living room. It was just a computer, but it felt like so much more. It was my weapon, my confessor, my co-conspirator. I found an old wooden crate in the garage, the kind used for shipping wine. The computer fit inside perfectly. I patted it with old towels, then closed the lid. On a piece of masking tape, I wrote 2 words in black marker and stuck it on the top of the crate. Evidence of silence. It wasn't just evidence of her violence. It was evidence of the neighbor's complicity, of the community's willful ignorance, of a world that had remained silent for far too long. I slid the crate into the back of a deep closet behind old winter coats and boxes of forgotten Christmas ornaments. The case was closed. The neighbors, of course, were curious. They had seen the police cars, the news reports. They had seen Karen's golf cart disappear from the driveway. Mrs. Patel from across the street came over one afternoon, a plate of cookies in her hand, her face a mask of practiced neighborly concern. "Lauren, dear, we were all so worried," she said, her eyes trying to peer past me into the house. "Is everything all right?" we saw on the news. I took the plate from her, offering a small, polite smile that didn't reach my eyes. Thank you, Linda. That's very kind. It's just awful what they were saying about Karen. She pressed on. She was always such a nice woman. Always waved. I looked out at the street at the row of identical quiet houses. Yes, she was, I said. There were some problems with the community security system, but we fixed it. Everything is fine now. She looked at me, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. The answer didn't fit the narrative she had constructed. It wasn't juicy enough. Oh, she said. The security system. Well, okay, dear. Let us know if you need anything. I watched her walk back across the street. And for the first time in years, I felt a profound sense of lightness. I wasn't carrying their expectations anymore. I wasn't hiding a dark, ugly secret for their comfort. I had fixed the system. Let them wonder what that meant. A few days later, while cleaning out the community shed, I found the last piece of her. Tucked behind a stack of approved paint samples, stuck to the back wall by a film of condensation, was a small folded piece of notepaper. I pulled it out. The paper was cold and slightly damp. I unfolded it. It was her handwriting, a thick angry scroll in blue ballpoint ink. The letters pressed so hard they were embossed on the paper. It was from weeks ago, a message she must have left for me to find. Contained 4 words. Change the code or else. I stood there in the cold draft of the open shed. The note in my hand. This was the threat, the ultimatum, the physical manifestation of her tyranny, hidden among the supplies of our daily lives. I closed the shed door. I walked through the streets and out to the community fire pit we rarely used. I found some old dry kindling in the storage area and a book of matches in the welcome center drawer. I knelt by the pit and built a small pile. Took a few tries, but soon a small hungry flame began to lick at the wood. I held the note in my hand, reading her angry scroll one last time. Then I folded it neatly and dropped it into the heart of the fire. I watched as the edges curled and blackened, the blue ink turning to a ghostly gray before the paper was consumed by the bright orange flame, turning into a delicate floating piece of ash that disintegrated into nothing. The fire crackled, its warmth a welcome contrast to the evening chill. The flames danced and their flickering light cast long moving shadows across the lawns and the back of the houses. I glanced through the sliding glass door into my living room where my laptop sat on the coffee table. The firelight reflected off its dark blank screen. The machine was inert, its job done. The final backup was complete, stored safely in the digital ether and in the sealed wooden box in my closet. There was no need for new backups. There was no need for constant vigilance. It was over. A slow smile touched my lips, a real one that I felt deep in my bones. I turned back to the fire, watching the last of the kindling burn down to glowing red embers. I whispered the words to myself, to the flames, to the ghost of the woman who had haunted this neighborhood for so long. No need, I said. It's over. A month passed. The neighborhood began to breathe again, its rhythm syncing with my own. I reclaimed the space in small, quiet ways. I moved the community bulletin board so it faced the park instead of the blank wall where Karen's rules used to be posted. I bought a coffee maker that brewed only 1 cup at a time. I filled the silence not with noise, but with a comfortable, settled solitude. The ghosts were still there, but they were fading, their whispers growing fainter with each passing day. I was learning the difference between being alone and being lonely. Then one Tuesday afternoon, an email arrived. It appeared in my inbox, stark and jarring amidst the junk mail and order confirmations. The sender's address was a string of institutional numbers, but the subject line was brutally clear. An inmate message from Karen Whitaker. My first instinct was to delete it without reading, to just wipe it from existence and continue with my day. What could she possibly say that mattered? But curiosity, a cold and clinical kind of curiosity, won out. I clicked it open. The interface was plain, a text box stripped of all personality, designed for function, not conversation. Her message was short, just 5 words. A question that revealed she had learned absolutely nothing. Why did you record me? I stared at the question for a long time. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wasn't acknowledging her crime. She was looking for a motive that would fit her narrative. In her world, she was the protagonist. And my actions had to be the result of a flaw in my character, spite, jealousy, insanity. She couldn't comprehend that she was the cause, that her own actions were the origin of the story. The why was a mystery to her because she was incapable of seeing herself. I thought about all the possible answers: because you were a tyrant, because you hurt the community, because you deserved it. But those were emotional responses. And this was no longer an emotional matter. It was a technical one. I had to give her the answer that was rooted in the very beginning of it all, in the core of her disdain for me. My fingers moved across the keyboard, typing a single simple sentence that held the weight of years of her contempt. Because you said women shouldn't touch code. I hit send. The answer was the truth. My rebellion wasn't born from the violence of that final night alone. It was born from her relentless campaign to erase me, to dismiss my intelligence, to mock the one thing in the world that was truly mine. She had tried to lock me out of my own life, so I had used my skills to lock her into hers. Her reply came less than an hour later, a testament to the idle time she now possessed. It was even shorter than the first message, a pure, distilled drop of victimhood. You ruined my life. I read the words and I felt a profound and surprising emptiness. There was no surge of satisfaction, no flicker of pity, no lingering trace of anger. It was like reading a line in a manual for a machine that had been decommissioned. The statement was factually incorrect. I had not been the architect of her ruin. I had simply documented its construction. She was the one who had laid the foundation, framed the walls, and hammered the last nail into her own coffin. I typed my final response, the last words I would ever send to her. No, you coded it yourself. I sent the message. Then, without a moment's hesitation, I clicked on her sender address and selected block. A small confirmation box popped up. You will no longer receive messages from this address. I clicked OK. A final quiet digital banishment. The connection was severed. The conversation was over forever. A week later, postcard arrived. The picture on the front was a hypersaturated image of a California beach with impossibly blue water and surfers frozen mid-curl. It was a picture of a life that felt a million miles away. I flipped it over. The handwriting was Karen's, a familiar looping script that seemed to waver slightly, as if written by a hand that was not quite steady. Her message was as brief and bright as the picture on the front. It's beautiful here. The sun shines every day. You can start over. Lauren. You can be happy. Start over. The words felt hollow. A well-intentioned but fundamentally flawed understanding of what had happened. Starting over implies an eraser, a wiping of the slate. But what I had gone through wasn't a chapter to be torn out and discarded. It was the bedrock on which my new life was being built. Forgetting wasn't the goal. Remembering was. I didn't throw the postcard away. I took it to my desk and propped it up against a small stack of books. Then I opened a drawer and took out the small, unlabeled USB drive I used to wear around my neck. It was the drive that held the master encryption key and a pristine original copy of the 6-minute video. It was a small, dense object, heavy with the weight of what it contained. I placed the USB drive on the desk right next to the postcard. They sat there side by side, a strange and silent pair of artifacts. The postcard, with its sunny, desperate plea to forget and start anew. The drive, a dark, solemn promise to never forget. They were the two opposing forces that would define the rest of my life. the world's desire for me to heal by moving on, and my own quiet understanding that true healing comes from acknowledging the scars, not pretending they don't exist. They were a reminder. Don't forget the price that was paid, but don't go back to the place that exacted it. I looked away from the desk and out the window. The sky was a familiar shade of Washington gray, a soft, bruised blanket that hung low over the houses. A light drizzle had begun to fall, the drops streaking down the glass, blurring the world outside. The gentle, persistent patter of the rain was the only sound in the quiet house. It was the same sound, the same rain that had been falling on the night years ago when I first sat at my computer, a quiet fury burning in my heart, and wrote the first line of the code that had ultimately set me free. The rain had been there at the beginning, and it was here now, at the end or perhaps at the new beginning. 6 months after the hearing, my life had found a new quiet rhythm. The neighborhood association had been restructured. I moved into a minimalist condo in downtown Seattle, a place with clean lines, large windows, and no covenants. I had started my own cybersecurity consulting firm, a small boutique operation that specialized in personal digital security for high-risk homeowners. The work was challenging and it was mine. I was building something new from the ashes of my old life. It was through this new venture that the invitation came. It was an email from the organizers of the Pacific Northwest Homeowners' Rights Conference, one of the largest annual gatherings in the region. They were looking for a keynote speaker for their closing luncheon. The theme was protect yourself, not just your property. A colleague had recommended me, citing my expertise in creating unbreakable personal security protocols. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I accepted. The venue was a vast, soulless hotel ballroom. The air was chilled to a precise 68 degrees and smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and catered chicken. The room was filled with hundreds of homeowners. They were engineers, retirees, young families, a vibrant, intelligent sea of faces. I stood at the podium, a bottle of water and my laptop beside me, and looked out at them. In my tailored blazer and with my carefully prepared slides, I was the picture of a competent professional. No one here knew that my most important work had been conducted not in a corporate lab, but in the suffocating silence of a suburban driveway. My speech was technical, but personal. I didn't talk about Karen. I didn't talk about the neighborhood. I spoke in abstractions and case studies. I talked about the vulnerabilities in off-the-shelf security systems, the illusion of privacy in the digital age, and the importance of creating bespoke layered defenses. I used metaphors of castles and moats, of digital fortresses built to withstand not just external threats but internal ones. I spoke about the ethics of surveillance and the power of immutable ledgers. My voice was calm, my delivery measured. I was an expert sharing my knowledge. When I finished, there was a polite, enthusiastic round of applause. The moderator, a cheerful woman with a bright pink blazer, stepped up for the Q&A session. The first few questions were predictable. They were about quantum computing's threat to current encryption standards, about the best VPNs for personal use, about career advice. I answered them easily, staying within the safe, professional confines of the topic. Then a young woman in the third row stood up. She looked like a new homeowner, her face earnest, a notebook clutched in her hand. She waited for the microphone, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and curious. "Hi, Lauren. That was a really inspiring talk," she began. "I was just wondering, you speak about this with so much passion. It's more than just a job for you. I can tell. What was it that first got you interested in security programming? Why did you start?" The question landed. It was the one I had been both dreading and hoping for. The air in the ballroom seemed to still. All the technical talk, all the professional jargon fell away. This was a question about origins. This was a question about the why. I looked at her, at her bright, expectant face, and I knew I couldn't give her the canned answer I had prepared about a fascinating college lecture or an early mentor. She deserved more. They all deserved more. I took a slow breath, my hands resting on the edges of the podium. "That's a good question," I began, my voice a little quieter than before, drawing the audience in. I started my career working for large corporations, protecting their data, their intellectual property. But I learned a valuable lesson along the way. I paused, letting the weight of my next words settle before I spoke them. I learned that sometimes the most important system you'll ever have to secure is your own life. And sometimes real safety doesn't come from a locked gate or a strong password. I swept my gaze across the entire room, meeting the eyes of dozens of homeowners, one after another. "It comes from evidence." A ripple went through the room. It wasn't a gasp, not a sound at all. It was a change in the quality of the silence. It was a sudden, collective intake of breath. The polite, professional atmosphere of the conference was punctured by a moment of raw, unvarnished truth. I saw nods of understanding. I saw faces that were no longer just curious, but deeply personally engaged. The question had been answered. The moderator, sensing the shift, quickly thanked me, and the luncheon concluded. As people began to file out, a small line formed in front of the stage. A few homeowners wanted to talk about job opportunities. Others wanted to praise the speech. I smiled, shook hands, and accepted business cards. Then a woman who had been waiting at the back of the line approached. She was in her late 40s, dressed in a simple, elegant dress. There was nothing remarkable about her except for the look in her eyes. It was a look of profound, weary recognition. She didn't try to shake my hand. She leaned in close as if to share a corporate secret, and her voice was a barely audible whisper. "That was a very necessary talk," she said. Then she hesitated, her eyes darting around the emptying ballroom before meeting mine again. "I have my own camera system at home," she whispered. "My HOA thinks it's for burglars." The words hung in the air between us. A complete, devastating confession in a single sentence. She didn't need to say more. I didn't need to ask. In that moment, we were not two strangers at a conference. We were members of a secret, silent club that neither of us had ever wanted to join. I looked at her and the professional mask I had worn all day finally fell away. I gave her a small, tight smile, not of pity, but of solidarity, of shared knowledge. "Good," I said, my own voice a low whisper. "Don't change the code." Her eyes widened slightly and a flicker of something. Gratitude, understanding, relief passed across her face. She just nodded once, a quick sharp dip of her head, and then turned and melted back into the crowd. I never saw her again, but I didn't need to. That night, I was scrolling through a homeowners' rights news aggregator on my phone, and I saw a trending topic from the conference. It was a hashtag, "Don't change the code." It was being used by people who had been at the luncheon. They were sharing their own stories, not of violence, but of quiet defiance. A software engineer who had refused to remove her name from a neighborhood petition she had led. A project manager who had fought to get a fair vote on board elections. A young coder who had stood up to an HOA president who constantly belittled her. My phrase, born in a moment of desperate defiance in a dark driveway, had been given a new life. It had been transformed from a personal mantra into a public symbol of resistance. My story, in its anonymous abstracted form, had become a vessel for their own. I never stepped forward to claim it. I never told a reporter or a blogger that I was the one who had first said those words at the podium. My name remained separate from the story. It was better that way. An anonymous story belongs to everyone. I switched off my phone and looked out the window of my condo at the glittering lights of the city. For years, I had believed I was utterly alone in my quiet suburban prison. My fight had been a solitary one, waged in silence and in code. But now I knew that wasn't true. All across this city, all across the country, there were other homeowners with their own cameras, their own hidden servers, their own quiet, coded rebellions. We were a network, an invisible, distributed system of witnesses, and I was not alone anymore. The keys felt foreign in my hand, the metal cold and unfamiliar, even though they had once been a part of me. The new owners were taking possession tomorrow. The neighborhood had been restructured, its contents cleared out, its history scrubbed and sanitized for the next generation of residents. But I had to come back one last time. There was one last piece of the old system to decommission. I parked on the street, not in the driveway. It wasn't my driveway anymore. The neighborhood looked smaller. Somehow, stripped of its context and its power. It was just a collection of houses. A collection of wood and nails and glass. No longer the prison it had once been. I walked up the path, my footsteps the only sound in the quiet afternoon. The key turned in the community gate with a final grating click. The inside was a hollow, echoing shell. The signs were gone. The walls were bare and the lawns had been professionally reseeded, erasing any trace of our lives. The air smelled of fresh paint and chemical lemon scent. It was a blank slate, a stage waiting for a new play to begin. I walked through the empty streets, my footsteps echoing on the sidewalks. The meeting hall where Karen had pleaded with everyone to keep the peace. The driveway where I had fallen. Her office, now just a box-shaped room. They were just spaces, their ghosts exorcised by the mundane reality of real estate transactions. My destination was the community storage shed. I pushed the door open and the familiar smell of fresh paint and concrete hit me. A phantom limb of memory. This room had been her domain, and it was the last to be cleared. A crew was there, not police, but a cleaning service the new board had insisted on before the restructuring. Men in white coveralls were scrubbing the concrete floor. Their movements were efficient and impersonal. The dark stain I had left untouched was gone, blasted away by high-pressure hoses and chemicals. They were erasing the last physical scar, closing the case file on the neighborhood itself. They paid me no mind. Just another part of the scenery to be cleaned around. In the back corner, high up near the ceiling, it was still there. The last camera, the first one I had ever installed. It was dark, inert, its power cut long ago, but its presence was a silent testament. I pulled over an empty packing crate and stood on it, a screwdriver in my hand. The plastic casing was cool to the touch. It was a simple off-the-shelf model, but I had gutted it, rebuilt its firmware, and turned it into the heart of my silent rebellion. It was my witness. I unscrewed the mounting bracket, the metal groaning in protest. The camera came loose in my hand. I held it for a moment, looking into its wide, dark lens. It had seen everything. It had watched her in her moments of quiet, simmering rage, and in her explosions of overt violence. It had watched me in my silent, watchful waiting. It had been the only impartial eye in a neighborhood built on lies and denial. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear, me, standing on a stepladder in this very spot years ago. A knot of fear and determination in my stomach as I threaded the wires and angled the lens. A desperate act of self-preservation disguised as a hobby. I followed the thin black power cable to where it disappeared into the wall. I didn't have wire cutters, so I just gripped the cord with both hands and pulled. There was a sharp crack, and the cable came free from the wall jack. A small puff of drywall dust exploding into the air. The camera was finally completely disconnected, an eye that had been blinded. I held it up, its lens reflecting my own face, a distorted fisheye version of the woman I had become. I thought of its tiny red light, how it had glowed like a single, watchful star in the darkness of this shed, a silent promise that the truth was being recorded. It had never wavered, never failed. I brought the camera close to my face, the lens just inches from my mouth, and I whispered to it a final confession to my silent partner. "You saw it all," I said, my voice a low, reverent murmur. "You never blinked." I stepped down from the crate and carried the camera out of the shed, past the cleaning crew, who were finishing their work, into the main part of the neighborhood. I found a garbage can left in the welcome center and I dropped the camera inside. The plastic clatter it made as it hit the bottom was a sound of absolute finality. I was done with looking back. I walked to the community gate, my hand on the knob. I was about to step outside to leave this place for the last time when a voice from the past echoed in my mind. It was Mrs. Patel's voice from a phone call a week after the sentencing. A call filled with tears and recriminations. "Don't touch the code anymore, Lauren. Promise me. Just live a normal life." It was her final plea. Her last attempt to push me back into the box she felt was safe. I stepped out onto the sidewalk, pulling the gate shut behind me. The lock clicked into place. I was outside, standing in the bright, unfiltered glare of the afternoon sun. I squinted, the light almost painful after the gloom of the empty neighborhood. I thought of her words, her definition of a normal life, a life without defenses, a life of willful blindness. A slow smile spread across my face. "I won't," I whispered to the empty air. A promise made to a ghost. "I won't touch that code." That code was born of pain and fear. That code was a defense, a reaction. My work now was something different. I reached into the pocket of my jacket. My fingers closed around a small, cool object. It was a new USB drive, casing a sleek, unmarked black. It wasn't the drive from my old life. That one was sealed away with the other evidence of silence. This one was new. It was blank. It was a vessel for the future. On it was the framework for a new kind of security system. A proactive, intelligent network designed not just to record abuse, but to predict it, to offer homeowners a way out before the first fine ever fell. It was a system built not on revenge, but on prevention. I slipped the drive into a small zippered pocket inside my backpack and pulled the zipper shut. The click was quiet, but decisive. My work wasn't over. It was just beginning. I took one last look at the neighborhood. It was just a neighborhood now. A silent, empty shell on a quiet suburban street. Its power over me was broken. The story was finished. But mine was not. I hadn't just survived the system I was trapped in. I had learned its vulnerabilities, its exploits, and its source code. I had taken it all apart, piece by piece, and I had built something stronger in its place. I turned away from the gate and started walking down the street, my face toward the sun, leaving the long shadows of the past behind me. I didn't change the code. I said to myself, the words of final quiet declaration of independence. I rewrote it. The screen goes black. The end. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'm so grateful to have you here with me. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from today. I'd love to connect and hear your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And to help this story reach more people who might need to hear it, please support us by hitting that hype button. Your support means the world.